Hey, M CARBO brother, I'm Chris Nelson, president of CARBO. Really excited to introduce a new Ruger Mini-14 Mini-30 trigger spring kit for your Ruger rifle, giving you nearly a 30% trigger pull reduction, not to mention also eliminating that heavy, gritty factory trigger pull. One heck of an improvement. Let's jump on over to tabletop, put this baby in. Parts and tools needed for this build: Ruger Mini-14 Mini-30 trigger spring kit by M CARBO, Phillips head screwdriver, 1/8 inch punch, 1/16 inch punch, a hammer, block of wood with a hole in it, and as always guys, make sure to wear an eye pro. Before we get started, let's go ahead and check our firearms together, make sure they're clear, make sure the magazine's been removed. Go ahead and check the chamber, check the bolt face, check the magazine. Well, this firearm's clear. Let's see what kind of factory trigger pull we're starting with. 5 pounds, 5.2 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 5 pounds, 1.9 ounces. We begin the disassembly by charging the bolt. Want the hammer locked back? Go ahead and take your Phillips head screwdriver and go ahead and pop that trigger guard. So you stick in that hole right there and you pop it. Now you pull up and out right on the trigger assembly. Now set the rest of the firearm aside. We're going to focus on the trigger assembly. Now let's quickly go over the trigger assembly before we take it all apart. There's your hammer, here's your trigger here, and this is your Sear back here. Now here's your hammer spring, and the Sear spring is right underneath the Sear, situated right here inside the trigger. We're going to go ahead and tap out this trigger hinge pin here in a second to get access to it. It's a really straightforward trigger mechanism. Let's go ahead and pop out that hinge pin. Go ahead and pull the trigger and release that hammer. Go ahead and position that hinge pin over the hole, the block of the wood. Then take your 1/8 inch punch and go ahead and tap out that hinge pin. Alright, once it's tapped out, go ahead and set that pin aside. Now slowly remove that punch, keeping good pressure on everything so it doesn't go flying out of there. One thing I want you to take notice of is these legs on that trigger return spring are resting right there on the trigger assembly. So that'll be critical and very important during the reassembly process. Alright, go ahead and pull up and out on that trigger. Go ahead and set that trigger assembly aside. Now we're going to take apart the trigger and the Sear. So this trigger return spring, just remember how that's situated. We're going to go ahead and pop that off. Set that aside. Now we need to get access to this Sear and the Sear spring underneath it right here. So what we're going to do is push out that trigger bushing right there. So grab your block of wood and your smaller 1/16 inch punch and just push right down on that bushing, keeping pressure on that Sear so it doesn't go flying everywhere. Alright, there's the bushing right there. Set that aside. Now you can see how the Sear rests inside the trigger. The Sear's right there. And here's a Sear spring. We're going to go ahead and replace that. Now let's go ahead and open up our Ruger Mini-14 Mini-30 trigger spring kit by M CARBO and see how that Sear spring compares. Alright. I got the M CARBO spring here on the right, and I've got the stock spring there on the left. You can see there's a lot more flex in that M CARBO spring on the right. That's going to give us a nice, lighter, smoother, crisper trigger pull. Way less resistance and grit like that heavy stock spring's giving us. Alright, let's go ahead and put the M CARBO spring in. Go ahead and take your trigger and the M CARBO Sear spring, drop it right in that pocket. Then take the Sear, drop it right in over top of that spring. Then take our trigger bushing and set that down on the workbench. We're going to drop the Sear and trigger over top of that bushing. So get the holes lined up and then press down on the bushing. And drop right in like so. Nice. Alright, let's go ahead and put the trigger and Sear back in the trigger mechanism. Now go ahead and get that trigger return spring and get each loop on both sides of that trigger. Make sure you got this loop of the trigger return spring on the front side of the trigger like so. And those little legs, remember, those are going to rest on the actual trigger assembly. So we're going to drop it right in to the trigger assembly. We want those little legs of the trigger return spring to rest right here on the trigger assembly. There's a lot of tension there with that trigger return spring, so we're going to have to really put some good pressure on it to get it in place. Alright, you can see how I'm starting in front of it like that, and then I'm going to be pushing right down. Okay, so I got in front of it, got a bite on it, now I'm putting the tension on it. So it's going to really take a good amount of tension to get those holes lined up. And what you want to do, get those holes lined up and drop your 1/8 inch punch right in there. So you're going to have to look. You're going to have to look through the holes. There you go. drop that punch right through it. It helps if you press down on the punch. You got the punch on your table there. See, now we got it situated and staged perfectly. So you can see the legs there, that trigger return spring resting on the trigger assembly. Now we need to go ahead and push that trigger hinge pin through. So what we'll do is we'll line up that hinge pin with the punch and push the punch out slowly. And you push down on that trigger just like that. It'll help relieve some of that tension on that trigger return spring and allow you to easily push that pin right in. And then you can just push down your block of wood to get the rest of the way. Look at that. Good to go. Now we just need to go ahead and insert the trigger assembly back into the stock, but I'm going to give you a quick demo on how it actually locates inside the receiver. You see this channel right here on the ejection port side of the receiver. You'll notice this notch right here on the trigger assembly. This notch will go into this channel right here. Make sure the hammer's locked back, make sure the trigger guard's open like so. It's going to drop and locate just like that into that channel, and then when we actually lock it in place, you'll notice these tabs right here will go into the actual openings here on the receiver. So we'll close the trigger guard. You see how it'll lock and locate into place, and it's nice and solid. So I just want to give you that quick demo on how it actually locates inside the receiver. Let's go ahead and put this baby in properly. Now we're going to go ahead and install the trigger assembly back into the receiver. Make sure the hammer's locked back and the trigger guard's open like so. We're going to locate this notch here into that channel in the receiver on the ejection port side. Go ahead and drop that notch into the channel. You want to make sure the trigger assembly drops into this cutout right here. Go ahead and push it forward, backward, make sure that notch is located in the channel. Now we'll go ahead and push down on the trigger guard. All right, get it most of the way there. Then just take your palm of your hand and just give it a good whack. Good to go. Now that we got our firearms back together, let's go ahead and do a quick function check. Place it on safe, pull the trigger, nothing, good. Place it on fire, pull the trigger. Oh, nice. Let's go ahead and test this trigger pull. All right, let's see what kind of modified trigger pull we got. 4 pounds, 3.5 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 4 pounds, 1.8 ounces. Well, there you have it, guys. Nearly a 1.5 pound trigger pull reduction for your Ruger Mini-14 or your Mini-30. Most importantly, though, getting rid of that really heavy, gritty factory trigger pull. It's a much more smoother, cleaner, more even trigger pull. You know how the factory gritty trigger pull can have that secondary wall at the end that you have to pull even harder just to get that hammer to drop. No longer is that an issue. It's actually nice and smooth and crisp all the way through. That feels fantastic. That's the main benefit. It is nearly a 1.5 pounds lighter, 30% reduction, but most importantly, that grit, that heavy secondary wall that you hit on that trigger pull is gone. It's completely smooth and even now, which is what it should be. Still a little bit of pre-travel, but a fantastic improvement for what it is. 15-minute trigger job. That feels amazing. Thank you, M CARBO Brother, for your ideas and your support, and as always, happy shooting.